The Witch of Blackbird Pond, Chapter 10. "You didn't," Mercy gasped. "Mr. Kimberly himself? How did you ever dare, Kit?" "I don't know," admitted Kit. Now that it was over, her knees were shaking. "But he was very fair. He listened to me, and he finally agreed I could have one more chance. I won't let you down again, Mercy, I promise." "I never thought you had let me down," Mercy said loyally. "It's just that you do have a way of surprising people." "You certainly must have surprised Mr. Kimberly. He isn't known for changing his mind." "I surprised myself," Kit laughed. "I really can't take any credit for it, Mercy. I think I was bewitched." "Bewitched?" "I met the witch who lives down in the meadow. It was she who gave me the courage." Mercy and her mother exchanged startled glances. "You mean you talked with her?" An anxious frown wrinkled Mercy's forehead. "I went into her house and ate her food. But I was joking about being bewitched. She's the gentlest little person you ever saw. You'd love her, Mercy." "Kit," Aunt Rachel set down her heavy flat iron and regarded her niece seriously, "I think you had better not say anything to the others about meeting this woman." "Why, Aunt Rachel, you of all people! You can't believe she's a witch." "No, of course not. That is just malicious gossip. But no one in Weathersfield has anything to do with Hannah Tupper." "Why on earth not?" "She is a Quaker." "Why is that so dreadful?" Rachel hesitated. "I can't tell you exactly. The Quakers are queer, stubborn people. They don't believe in the sacraments." "What difference does that make? She is as kind and good as you are, Aunt Rachel. I could swear to it." Rachel looked genuinely distressed. "How can you be so sure? Quakers cause trouble wherever they go. They speak out against our faith. Of course, we don't torment them here in Connecticut. In Boston, I've heard they even hanged some Quakers. This Hannah Tupper and her husband were branded and driven out of Massachusetts. They were thankful enough just to be let alone here in Weathersfield." "Has she ever done any harm?" "No, perhaps not, though there's been talk. Kit, I know your uncle would be very angry about this. Promise me you won't go there again." Kit looked down at the floor. All her fine resolves about trying to understand and to be patient, and already she could feel the defiance rising again. "You won't, will you, Kit?" "I can't promise that, Aunt Rachel," said Kit unhappily. "I'm sorry, but I just can't. Hannah was good to me, and she's very lonely." "I know you mean to be kind," insisted Rachel. "But you are very young, child. You don't understand how sometimes evil can seem innocent and harmless. 'Tis dangerous for you to see that woman. You must believe me." Kit picked up her wool cards and set to work. She knew she looked stubborn and ungrateful, and she felt so. The hard little knot had kinked up inside her tighter than ever. Coming home through the meadow, everything had seemed so simple, and here it was all tangled again. Only one thing was sure. She had found a secret place, a place of freedom and clear sunlight and peace. Nothing that anyone could say would prevent her from going back to that place again. Should she tell William Ashby about Hannah? she wondered that evening as they sat talking in the summer twilight. No, he would doubtless be horrified. William still seemed a stranger, even though he came faithfully every Saturday evening, and often now appeared unexpectedly on fine evenings between. She could never be sure what thoughts were hidden behind that impassive face, but she had learned to recognize the sudden stiffening of his jaw muscles that meant she had said something shocking. That happened often enough, in spite of her best intentions. Better not to provoke it now by mentioning a harmless Quaker. She would like to tell John Holbrook, she thought, but there was never a moment when she could speak to him alone. Frequently now, on these mild evenings of early summer, John joined the family as they sat outside. The women would carry their knitting to the doorstep, and they would all talk quietly there till the mosquitoes and the coming darkness drove them indoors. John had never asked formal permission to call. He had merely taken literally Rachel's invitation to come again. There had never been the slightest hint that he was courting Judith. He never seemed to single her out. But sometimes he consented when she suggested that they walk along the green in the twilight. That was all the encouragement Judith needed. Indeed, it was more than enough to satisfy the whole family of John's intentions. Not even her father could have failed to guess that Judith was in love. She had never spoken another word, even to Mercy or Kit, after that first surprising disclosure. But there was a brilliance in her eyes, a warm color in her cheeks, and a new sweetness in her manner. Less and less often, as the summer set in, did her tart tongue discomfort her cousin. She did not even chatter as readily, and often she seemed to be withdrawn into some secret world. Kit watched her, half envious and half puzzled. The sober young divinity student seemed an odd match for Judith's high spirits. Truth to tell, Kit herself was a little disappointed in John. Beside William, who was so set in his ways, John seemed scarcely able to make up his mind at all. When the talk turned to politics, as it invariably did, William made a far better showing than John. Nothing the revered Dr. Bulkley could say or do could be wrong in his pupil's eyes. Even the fervent defense of the king's policies, which went against all John's upbringing. Matthew would, after baiting John with fierce questions that threw the young student into confusion, had scornfully labeled him a, quote, young toady with no mind of his own, unquote. For once, Kit was inclined to agree with her uncle. Probably, she concluded now, it would do no good to ask John about Hannah Tupper. Whatever Dr. Bulkley thought about Quakers, John would think so too. She had to bide her time for 2 weeks before she could find another opportunity to visit the meadows. Kit kept her word to Mr. Kimberly, and threw herself so diligently into the schoolwork that the children were bewildered. There were no more stories, no games, even no small unorthodox poems. After school hours there were the gardens to weed, and the first crop of flax to harvest in the hilly slopes above the town. Finally, on one hot afternoon, Kit and Judith finished their stint of onion rows a little early, and as they trudged back along the dusty path, Kit looked across the fields to the roof of the lopsided house by Blackbird Pond, and knew that she could not pass by one more time. "I'm going over there to see Hannah Tupper," she announced, trying to sound matter-of-fact. "The witch? Have you lost your senses, Kit?" Judith was scandalized. She's not a witch, and you know it. She's a lonely old woman. And Judith, you couldn't help liking her if you knew her." "How do you know?" demanded Judith. Kit gave her cousin a short and careful version of the meeting in the meadow. "I don't see how you dared," Judith exclaimed. "Really, Kit, you do the oddest things." "Come with me now, Judith, and see for yourself." Judith couldn't be budged. "I wouldn't step inside that house for anything, and I don't think you should either. Father would be furious." "Then you go on without me. I won't be long." "What shall I tell them at home?" "Tell them the truth if you like," responded Kit airily, knowing quite well that Judith, for all her disapproval, would never give her away. The common bond of just being young together in that household was strong enough for that. She set off through the long grass, leaving her cousin standing doubtfully in the path. There was a pleasant humming sound in the small cabin. Hannah sat before her small flax wheel, her foot moving briskly on the treadle. "Sit down, child, while I finish this spindleful." She smiled as though Kit had merely stepped outside the door a moment before. Kit perched on a bench and watched the whirring wheel. "I came to tell you that I made peace with the schoolmaster," she said at last. "I couldn't come before because I've been teaching in the school again." Hannah nodded without surprise. "I thought thee would," she commented. "Does it go better with thee now?" "Yes, I suppose so. At least Mr. Kimberly should be satisfied. He says that children are evil by nature and that they have to be held with a firm hand. But it's not much fun trying to keep my hand firm and being so solemn all day long. I feel sorry for those little boys." Hannah glanced over at Kit briefly. "So do I," she said dryly. "Did the schoolmaster make thee promise never to smile?" Kit looked back at the faded eyes, sunk deep in wrinkles, and caught the twinkle there. Suddenly she laughed. "Oh, you're right," she admitted. "I haven't even dared to smile. I'm afraid if I let myself go an inch, I'll do something disgraceful again. But Mercy smiles all day long and still keeps order." She reached down and scooped up the sleeping cat from the floor, settling its limp weight in her lap and tickling the soft chin until a contented purr almost matched the hum of the spinning wheel. The late afternoon sun slanted through the open door and fell across Hannah's gnarled hands as they moved swiftly and surely. Peace flowed into Kit. She felt warm and happy. "How fast you go," she said, watching the thread fattening on the bobbin. "Did you grow the flax yourself?" Hannah dipped her fingers into a gourd shell without slackening the wheel. "Some of the families in town always bring me their flax to spin," she explained. "I make a nice, neat thread, if I do say so. But every year it seems to get harder to see it. I have to tell by the feel. Is it smooth enough, does thee think?" Kit admired the fine, perfect thread that slipped evenly through Hannah's fingers. "It's beautiful," she said. "Even Mercy can't spin it like that." Hannah looked pleased as a child. "4 pence a skein," she said. "Enough to pay the taxes and buy what I need." "Taxes? On this swamp land?" Kit was indignant. "Of course," Hannah said matter-of-factly. "And the fines for not going to meeting." "They make you pay fines for that? Wouldn't it be better to go to meeting instead?" Kit looked around at the much-mended clothing and the sparse furnishings of the little room. "I doubt they would welcome me," Hannah said, again dryly, "even if I chose to go. In Massachusetts, we Quakers had our own meetings." "Can I become a Quaker?" asked Kit, only half joking. "I'd rather pay a fine any day than go to meeting." Hannah chuckled. "Thee doesn't become a Quaker just to escape the meeting," she said, and Kit flushed at the gentle reproof in her tone. "How does one become a Quaker?" she asked seriously. "I wish I knew something about it, Hannah." The old woman was silent for a moment. Before she could answer, a shadow fell across the sunlight. A tall figure filled the doorway. Kit started. For an instant, she thought that Hannah actually had conjured up a vision. There, unbelievably, was Nathaniel Eaton, the captain's son, leaning easily against the doorpost, with that well-remembered mocking smile in his blue eyes. "I might have known," he said, "that you two would find each other." Hannah's face crinkled up with pleasure. "I knew thee would come today," she triumphed. "I saw the dolphin pass Wright's Island this morning. Kit, my dear, this is the seafaring friend I told thee about." Nat made a bow. "Mistress Tyler and I are already acquainted," he acknowledged. He tried to set down, without anyone's noticing, the small barrel he carried under one arm, but Kit's glance was quick. A keg of fine Barbados molasses. So it was not just coral trinkets and flower bulbs that this seafaring friend of Hannah's brought from afar. Hannah caught the action, too. "Bless thee, Nat," she said quietly. "Now sit down and tell us where thee has been this time." "Charlestown," he answered, settling on an upturned barrel. Instantly the cat slid from Kit's lap and with a loud "Meow" leapt into Nat's and circled contentedly. Nat winced as her claws dug rapturously into his coarse homespun trousers. Hannah made fast the thread and sat with idle hands, her eyes never leaving the young sailor's face. "And thy father?" "He is well and sends you his greetings." "I've been listening for a breeze every morning, just thinking thee might be coming up the river. I said to Thomas just yesterday, 'Tom,' I said, 'I'm going to save the last of these berries, just in case the dolphin comes soon. He'll be pleased when I tell him you've been here.'" Kit's breath caught suddenly in her throat. Hannah had spoken as though her husband, so many years dead, were still here in the little house. A cloud had passed across the old woman's eyes, a vagueness that Kit had noticed there before. Kit turned a troubled look to Nat. He seemed not to have noticed anything amiss, but very casually he reached out his hand and covered Hannah's worn fingers with his own. "Has the old sheep-goat had her kids yet?" he asked easily. "Don't tell me you've sold them before I could see them." The vagueness was gone as suddenly as it had come. "I had to, Nat," Hannah said regretfully. "They were getting into the cornfield. They brought a good price, 2 hanks of wool for a new cape." Nat leaned back now and surveyed Kit with frank interest. She had forgotten the intense blue of his eyes, like the sea itself. "Tell me," he asked her, "how did they ever let you find your way to Hannah?" Kit hesitated, and Hannah chuckled. "How did thee find a way here?" she demanded of him. "'Tis a strange thing that the only friends I have I found in the same way, lying flat in the meadows, crying as though their hearts would break." The two young people stared at each other. "You?" breathed Kit incredulously. Nat laughed. "I'll have you know that I was only 8 years old," he explained. "Were you running away?" "I certainly was. We were on the way down river, and my father had just told me he was leaving me at Saybrook to spend the winter with my grandmother and go to school. It seemed like the end of the world. I had never lived anywhere but the Dolphin, and it had never occurred to me that anyone but my father would teach me. I'd never in my life seen anything like the meadows. They went on, and all at once I was hungry and thoroughly lost and scared. Hannah found me and brought me here and washed the scratches on my legs. She even gave me a kitten to take back with me." "A little gray tiger," Hannah remembered. "That cat was our lucky piece for 6 years. Not one of the men would have weighed anchor without her." Kit was entranced. "I can just see you," she laughed. "Did Hannah give you blueberry cake, too?" "Right here at the table," nodded Hannah. "I'd forgotten how a little boy could eat." Nat reached again to cover her hand with his own. "Hannah's magic cure for every ill," he teased. "Blueberry cake and a kitten." "Did you go back to school?" questioned Kit. "Yes. Hannah walked back to the ship with me, and somehow I felt bold as a lion. I didn't even mind the thrashing that was waiting for me." "I know," said Kit, remembering the walk up to Mr. Kimberly's door. "And now thee can both have supper with me again," said Hannah, delighted as a child at the prospect of a party. But Kit jumped to her feet with a guilty glance at the sun. "Oh, dear," she exclaimed, "I didn't realize it was time for supper." Hannah smiled up at her. "God go with thee, child," she said softly. She did not need to say more. They both knew that Kit would come back. Nat followed her to the door. "You didn't say what you were running away from," he reminded her. "Has it gone so badly here in Wethersfield?" She might have told him, but looking up, she caught a hint of "I told you so" in those blue eyes that silenced her. Was Nat laughing at her for behaving like an 8-year-old? Her head went up. "Certainly not," she said with dignity. "My aunt and uncle have been very kind." "And you've managed to stay out of the water?" That superior tone of his. "As a matter of fact," she told him haughtily, "I am a teacher in the dame school." Nat swept her a bow. "Fancy that," he said. "A schoolmistress." Instantly she wished she had not said it. But as Nat followed her into the road, his mocking tone changed. "Whatever it was," he said seriously, "I'm glad you ran to Hannah. She needs you. Keep an eye on her, won't you?" What a contradictory person he was, she thought, hurrying along South Road. Always putting her at a disadvantage somehow, and yet now and then surprising her, letting her peek through a door that always seemed to slam shut again before she could actually see inside. She would never know what to expect next from him.